So our fifth speaker is Dr. Maria Mylene Villegas. She is the Chief Science Research Specialist of the Geologic Disaster Awareness and Preparedness Division of the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. Her fields of interest includes earthquakes, tsunami, and volcano oral history and narratives, disaster education, community disaster preparedness, hazards and risk perception for earthquake, tsunami, and volcano. She is a licensed geologist. She took up her BS Geology degree at the University of the Philippines National Institute of Geological Sciences in Diliman. She finished her MS Geology degree at the Arizona State University, Tempe, Arizona, USA. So in 2004, she got her certificate in professional education program at the UP College of Education. She finished her Master of Development Communication in 2012 and Doctor of Communication in 2017, both degrees at the University of the Philippines Open University in Los Baños, Laguna. So our next speaker can join us live due to an equally important engagement, but as I've said, she prepared a pre-recorded presentation. You can still post your questions for Dr. Villegas. We will collate all of them and will send to everyone her responses through email.
Good afternoon. I'm Mylene Villegas, and I'll be presenting a brief about understanding geologic hazards and how to prepare for them. The reality is that the Philippines is prone to many natural hazards due to geologic and because of its geologic and geographic setting. And we have a lot of earthquakes, tsunami, volcanic eruptions, not to mention hydrometeorological hazards that will be discussed by our next speaker. In terms of geologic hazards, our country is surrounded by many volcanoes, and we record an average of 5 to 20 earthquakes per day. And we have historically more than 90 destructive earthquakes. And in this figure, you can see the red dots represent earthquakes, historical earthquakes that occurred in the Philippines and how much it actually covers the whole of the archipelago. These are epicenters. In terms of volcanic eruptions, our 6 most active volcanoes have had historical events. Some have been recorded to be very destructive and affected communities as well as many infrastructures. We have here the 6 most active: Pinatubo, Taal, Mayon, Bulusan, Canlaon, and Hibo-Kibo. And these are just some of examples of these major eruptive events. And of course, Mayon in 1984, but it has had several big events until 1993, and then smaller ones in the 2000s. And of course, 1990 Pinatubo, and Taal in 1911, 1965, and of course last year. Most of large-scale events geologically resulted to many disastrous impacts, causing loss of life, injuries to people, emergence of diseases, and I highlighted, of course, damages to buildings, infrastructures, properties, and equipment, because I think that is the concern for this today's session. This will also include loss or interruption of critical services that you may have in an organization, food supply interruption, and lifeline interruptions, specifically water, energy, or electricity, very important communication, even transportation, whether bridges are cut off or roads are not passable, damage to seaport, to the airport. And of course, in any kind of event, we have economic loss, our businesses are affected, livelihoods of people are would be on standstill. And so there is a big interruption economically. And most often, displacement of people, disruption of the communities, and damage to the environment. So our goal in disaster preparedness, risk reduction, is to continuously have effective and efficient performance of our operations and delivery of our core services. Ito yung business continuity planning natin. Disaster risk reduction and management also aims to make sure that we lessen the impact, but at the same time, make sure that we have continuous business if it's possible, or if disrupted, when can we again, how many hours or how many days are we able to up our business or our services to serve the public. But for our case, our goal for today, I think, yung concern ng UPLB Museum is to, one, our goal for resilience is to be able to reduce whatever losses, if possible, and that can be done before the occurrence of hazards if we prepare, and ensure that we have effective and efficient response for disaster, and timely and efficient recovery, how we can build forward. And we will look at this in the context of protecting our museums, but I will not be giving examples, obviously, because we do not have that. But what we can do is to think of how we can prepare based on what we have right now. So key actions for disaster resilience. One, we really need to know the hazards. That's why we're here. And if we know the hazards, kung alam natin yung kalaban natin, and then we can build scenarios, imagine things. Monitoring, we can depend on national government agencies for information, including warning and information dissemination. And we can respond properly and in a timely manner if we know information. So important to have mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery plan. These are just examples now because we are talking of cultural heritage, and although specific for museums yung ating pong pinag-usapan for today, these are just examples of structures, centuries-old structures that in one big earthquake event were very much destroyed. And so, ano yung plano natin for mga ganito? What can we do? Sana in preparation before this thing happen. If we know the history na pwede pala magkaroon ng lindol, and there has to be plans on how we can advance things. One major document that we have right now in the national level is this National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Plan. And I put here the link so that you can, if you are still unfamiliar, but I can see the program, I think may topics kayo on DRR plans. I just listed one, but you can browse through the document and you will see that in a lot of the outcomes for disaster prevention and mitigation, sa outcome 3, there is increased structural integrity of housing, building, critical infrastructure, and there are guidelines for the design, retrofitting, operational modifications, or whatever. And kasama naman po ang NCCA sa mga pagka-craft of mga sa plano na ito. No? And the one is to have resilient structures, infrastructures. And that is one way for us to be able to protect our museums. And so reinforcement, repair, and retrofitting for old structures. But currently, actually, it has to be like new structures should follow National Building Code by 2021. So yun yung goal ng national level. So how do we do? For us to prepare and build a resilient organization and facilities, we look at it from like how do we imagine what would happen. So it's scenario-based planning. And we go back to this knowledge that we have highly seismic activity in the Philippines. We are aware of that, and it's because of a lot of earthquake generators in the Philippines. The red ones are the faults, and the white assured ones are trenches, and they're all generators of earthquakes. And so in our history, marami na tayong lindol na naganap that affected Luzon. And some of this like Kasiguran in 68, Ragay in 73, and of course 1990 Central Luzon, because had an anniversary last month, mid this month. And what's important for us to know the hazards. And here we will be discussing some of this so that we will know how to prepare and make sure that this is inputted in our plan, like faulting, and that's when you have movement of the fault, or shaking of the ground, and liquefaction. Some earthquakes, if it's offshore, can have tsunami, can result to fire, or extreme shaking can also cause landslide. Rupture is, of course, when you have an active fault that moves, and of course, it would generate a fracture. If it reaches the surface, and ang tawag na dyan ay ground rupture. And some examples of horizontal will be the ones in the yung left lateral movement, while the Bohol event actually showed us that major vertical movement of the fault for Bohol. And for ground shaking, ito yung nararamdaman natin lahat. It's the up-down rocking motion. It can be very, very slow, or it can be very fast, strong, or mild, slightly felt. But this can cause damage if it's strong shaking. And ang impact niyan, one, ang extreme will be collapse of building, or building could be very severely damaged. Inside the structure, you have objects that would fall. And if it's like major infrastructure, pwede rin magkaroon ng mga collapses. This is from USGS. So iba-iba. Liquefaction, on the other hand, is when you have sand-rich materials underneath and it's saturated with water, and then because of extreme shaking, para siyang nag-liquefy. That's why liquefaction, or parang naging sand boil. And so it could cause subsidence of bridges, tilting of buildings, and some fissuring, similar to what happened in 1990. And of course, landslide. If you have very steep slope, loose soil on the surface, by just shaking it very extremely, can cause landslide, similar to what happened in Negros. This one is in China, and of course, the landslides during the 2013 Bohol. And tsunami, when you have an earthquake that occurs under the sea, it can generate waves because of the extreme shaking, displacement of the ground underneath, and so you create large waves, similar to what happened in Japan. May mga historical tsunamis din tayo, pero hindi naman tayo maapektuhan dito sa area natin, so we will not discuss that. Just some terminologies. When we say strength of the earthquake, we either talk about magnitude or intensity. Magnitude is the energy released. This is ito yung characteristic of the earthquake na unique sa kanya for that particular event. So it's in reported as calculated. Ito yung may decimal, 5.1, 6.8. Intensity is in Roman numeral. It's the effect or felt strength at the surface because of the shaking, and it's normally as what is observed and reported by people, and pwede na rin may instruments to na yan, ano? So intensity scale, this is our local version that we use from 1 to 10. Yung mga slightly perceptible hanggang a bit strong, that's 1 to 5. And then ito yung with damage, yung 6 to 10. And meron tayong illustration dito. Later on, this will be important to us. So this is an example of a very intense intensity age shaking. This is in Poben, 1995. Yeah, so you can see may onting lindol and then onting nila naramdaman. So that's a description of intensity 8, meaning hindi ka na makakatayo. how do we prevent, minimize, not the earthquake, but the effects? That's our goal. Babalik tayo dun sa slide kanina. What we want is to be able to identify the hazards in our area, in our region, and assess ano ba yung events, ano yung affected areas, and then so that we can do assessment of the risk, ano kaya yung magiging impact sa atin. May casualty ba, may injuries ba, ano yung physical impact, and economic, and so ano yung scenario natin. And so that's how we come up with the plan. For Region 4A, these are just some of the earthquakes that, historical earthquakes that affected Region 4A, starting 1824, based on our historical records, and the magnitude. So ito yung mga paglalaruan if we want to come up with scenarios and build on this for our plan. And the latest written here is 1994, November 15. So we can also have a scenario where the valley fault movement, valley fault moved with magnitude 7.2. And the colors represent the intensity. So what we expect is about 6 to 7 in Laguna area. I also tried to dig up some events. For example, in August 1937, that affected 7.5 and that affected Laguna area. So these are just some of the damages as reported, like churches damaged in Santa Maria, Fami, Angil, Paquete. So what we have are tools that can help us in planning. We used to have in I think this is 2016, introduced what we have. It's downloadable sa Google app, PHIVOLCS Fault Finder. You can input, download this, you can input your location, and then it will show you the distance. Remember, for hazard of ground rupture, for as long as you are not on top of the fault, okay lang. Pero shaking, of course, we are to expect. The problem is pag on top of the fault, of course, masisira ang structure. Ang tanong sa amin parati, safe ba kung ganyang kalayo? We always say na kahit nasa Manila ka and you're safe, di ba? Or nasa anong lugar ka ng Luzon, kapag ka nagkaroon ng lindol, expect shaking. So it's more important for us to know gaano kalakas yung shaking so we can prepare for it. Ang mahirap kung yung structure mo on the fault and then you have to stay away. There should not be development on top of the fault. And there's another tool, Rapid Earthquake Damage Assessment System, developed by some of our colleagues at PHIVOLCS. This is also the DOST-GIA funded before. But this one has a lot of modules and components to be studied. And this is very much recommended for LGU planners, for their planning offices, because it's like very comprehensive. So it has a lot of modules and it can be used if you have training to be availed. This is facilitated by Dr. Leo Bautista. But we have another tool under another DOST-GIA project, which was launched in 2019. It's called GeoRisk Philippines. And here, it has several features. This project, one of the products is what we call Hazard Hunter. So it's more simple tool that can be used by anybody for quick assessment of underlying hazards that are in your area. Kasi nasa database na lahat. No? Etong dalawa, it needs MOU for us to use like ano yung mga data within this exposure database and mga analytics. And so it's a collaboration with many national government agencies. So in 2019, when this was introduced, it's a multi-hazard assessment. So actually, may hazard maps then about Pag-asa, from Pag-asa and MGB. So nandito na lahat. You can actually download from Hazard Hunter, georisk.gov.ph. And I just did a very quick example of Hazard Hunter. Ginamit ko siya, I logged in and then tried to log in UPLB Museum. Parang hazard assessment, very quick to, no? And the result will be something like this. Lalabas yung map. This is UPLB Museum. And then lalabas na yung assessment results on this side. Nandito yung mga pwede mong input parameters. And so if you double click the point that you are interested in, for this case UPLB, lalabas ngayon tong mga assessment. For example, ground shaking, rupture. Wala namang dumadaan directly na fault. So it's safe from the fault. My nearest fault is about 19.7 kilometers. That's the valley fault. And then my ground shaking, and of course you are prone, and maximum sa scenario will be intensity 7. And so you will have an idea on how you will prepare your plan. And then may volcano ba? Wala. Prone obviously sa ashfall. Malalayo ang vulkan but prone to ashfall, which we kind of experienced last year in 2020. Of course, my hydrometeorological hazards. Again, I tried to click and for us to show yung dinadaanan ng fault, and nandito yung ating location. And so ito yung zoom ko lang. And so you can play around with this app. And so again, zoom in ko lang para lang makita nyo. What I did also is like download, report yung recommendations and download. Yung intensity 7 here, ang description niyan, ito, sa drawing pala makikita nyo extreme shaking. That could be some damages, damages in the bridges. People will be frightened, will run outdoors, will find it difficult to stand. The whole list you will find available also sa PHIVOLCS website for information on PEIS. Yung poster may version yan na packet size. So heavy objects, mag-turn, overturn, or topple, and pulley bridge structures will suffer considerable damage, and there could be liquefaction, or lateral spread, and landslides. So ito yung descriptions. And so in terms of, I also tried finding, like I clicked the hazard seismic and then click liquefaction, and so the map for high, moderate, and low showed up. And so you can see where your location is. So it's a way of checking quickly for purposes of planning. And so what I did is to try capture and screen grab. And ito yung kanina rin. And so ganito lang. And I hope that you will be able to use this because I think it's a very quick, easy tool that can be used. And then you can download, like we said earlier, you can click this green and download. And so ito yung mga lalabas, simple information from PHIVOLCS. And may volcano, and then may iba pa. And so it's very important for us to have a plan and prepare and be able to respond properly and timely. And there is always it's always important for us to test whatever plans we have. One is through drills that you can do. For example, in your museums, do you have evacuation plan? Do you orient museum goers? But before you can even orient museum goers, you have to orient your staff and make sure that they know what to do in case of an emergency and how do we evacuate. And so mga exercises can be done, whether it's tabletop, which can be done regularly, and of course functional or yung actual drill can also be done. And I think these are important things to remember and practice so that people will know what to do before, during, and after an earthquake. In this time of pandemic, we've come up with this new material on how, sabi ng iba parang, COVID sensitive preparation. So we have to like revise, update, I have to say, most of whatever plans we have and even materials to reflect the current situation. And for this case, of course, if we are required pa rin with face mask, and also we do, and distancing when evacuating. And in your bag now, we put, this is of course updated face mask in the emergency bag. And a distance while evacuating out of the building, nearest open space and advisory, it's the same. And there are still like other materials that we can use. For example, this is for home check, quick check. This is not applicable to buildings. There is one flyer that we have, How Safe is My House? It's for concrete hollow blocks. Marami kasi sa engineering, there are certain types of buildings and building materials, mga ganitong type, residential. And so there's a quick way, but it's always important to consult engineers before building or during when you're building a house. It's important that you are aware of how it's being built. And of course, preparedness. This is very general for community, but in terms of organization, I think it's always important to really be familiar with the hazards, come up with a plan on how to evacuate. So these are just examples of what we do in the community, but I'm sure within the organization, there is need to also have these kinds of activities. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.